Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, Quick Match gameplay. This time around, we are on the map Deadwood, and I'm playing as the Lizardmen against the High Elves. So, for this matchup, I decided to go with an incredibly elite, incredibly small composition. I didn't bring any sort of magic, and instead I decided to go with a pair of Scar veterans. This is very similar to the compositions I used to run when Warhammer 2 first came out, and I was kind of clueless about what I'm doing with all the new factions, and I wanted to just try different things out on that. But I'm reverting back to this a little bit, though this time around, rather than focusing on Stars Warriors and any support units, really, simply focusing on this core of heroes backed by some Temple Guard. And so, for my Lord, I decided to bring Gar. I did not bring Hand of the Gods because it's a very expensive spell and somewhat hit or miss in my experience. And if I had an extra 200 points, I probably would get it, but I didn't, so it's not here. Otherwise, everything as usual. Good old Sigurd's Bonding of Zodal, Deadly Onslaught, and of course Swiftness of Easel. And of course, he does have some very, very powerful stats with great melee attack, weapon strength, all that sort of stuff, thanks in large part to Frenzy. Then alongside him, I do have two Scar veterans. These guys are basically stripped down to the bare bones, but I did put the Plaque of Dominion on both of them. And this is, in my opinion, actually a rather potent skill because it's -8 leadership for 20 seconds on a fairly short cooldown. And combined with the fact that they already cause fear, which I do believe is -10 leadership, and then terror, which once you drop to about 20 or 30 leadership means you instantly rout, is a very, very potent combo. It means that you can rush in, nuke down enemy leadership in a matter of seconds, and cause a terror out, especially against lower end troops. For my front line, I did bring a whole bunch of Temple Guards. Temple Guards are, of course, the elite and the best sort of units that the Lizardmen can bring. Now, to be fair, their stats are not particularly great. They have low armor at only 85. They do have bronze shields, but that's not that great. Their melee attack is very low at 33, melee defense 40, and weapon strength is not actually that great either. It's at 42, though it is, of course, armor piercing, and you do have a bonus against large of 16. But if we, for example, compare it here to the High Elf Phoenix Guard, you can see that they're honestly not really, they're essentially worse. You have less armor, they don't have the built-in physical resistance 30%. Of course, with Martial Mastery, Phoenix Guard are looking at 46 melee attack and 52 melee defense. The only real disadvantage they have is, of course, their weapon strength, but they do have a larger bonus against large. They also do have charge defense against all, so they can essentially just bunker down and soak up the charge of the Temple Guards and do just fine. So really that is a little unfortunate. You can see 32-38 on the unupgraded variant. So these guys definitely, they do have somewhat better leadership, I do believe, than the, actually, it looks like it's just about the same when backed by Lord. So really, the Temple Guard don't have much going for them against the Phoenix Guard, but they're a little cheaper, and I do have them backed up by a single Bastillodon here with a Revivification Crystal, and this is a pretty potent unit. It does have, on a fairly short cooldown, it does have this ability called Revivification Crystal. On a 45-second cooldown, it's basically an invocation of Nehek. So it's a very potent spell, and it's a fairly tanky unit. Of course, the Revivification Crystal can be sniped down, but against High Elves who tend to lack armor piercing, it's going to be pretty potent. So for my opponent, he decided to go with a very elite army. Essentially, we're both tiny, tiny armies. 304 troops on my side, 309 on his, though that is somewhat something of an illusion because, of course, Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers, the crews don't count. So my opponent does have Tyrion here. And Tyrion is, of course, a very, very potent lord. He does have great stats, much better than, for example, Gar's, and just raw stats, except for weapon strength, which is much lower, and, of course, much less HP. He's got about 3,000 less HP than Gar, which could be a bit of a problem. He does have, of course, Faint Riposte, Stand Your Ground, and Sunfang, which gives him some pretty crazy abilities, and, of course, the Heart of Avalorn, so he can be incredibly survivable, he gets incredibly mobile, can cast buffs, and all that sort of stuff. And whereas with Gar, while he's very potent, doesn't really have any buffs for his army. Most of it is just about plowing through the enemy and going after his target. So I'm definitely kind of trying to goon enemy lords, goon targets of priority, and then kind of hoping to wipe out my opponent's backline. For my opponent's lord, he decided to bring a noble on an eagle. Bit of an interesting choice, personally. I don't really like putting nobles on eagles because you lose their armor piercing, and you do lose the bonus against large as well. So definitely decent in combat, but without any real bonus against large armor piercing, they're going to be a little weak. For my opponent's front line, my opponent does have a single Lore Master of Hoeth down here, who did bring most of his spells. He does have Harmonic Convergence, he does have Shem's Burning Great Gaze, Spirit Leech, and Earthblood, as well as, of course, Foe Seeker and Evasion. So he's very, very survivable. You can see my opponent's immediately pulling Tyrion back because I'm trying to charge into him with Gar, and now I'm trying to kind of soak up enemy fire with my trio of heroes here. But my opponent is having none of it, and he's immediately sniping at my Bastillodon with the Revivification Crystal, knowing that it is by far the most dangerous or problematic unit here. Now, For the rest of my opponent's army, he does have 4 units of Phoenix Guard, which, as we just discussed, have much better stats than Temple Guard, with the exception of their HP pool, because the Temple Guard have much higher HP. They have 1,800 more. You're looking at about you're looking at well over 100 HP on each Temple Guard model, which is simply not true for Phoenix Guard, who I do believe who are significantly lower. So that's, I do believe it's sitting around 80 or something like that per model, so definitely not as good. And then my opponent does have these 2 Eagle Claw bolt throwers, which he is using to snipe away at my Refication Crystal. That's definitely a good use of him, but here he does kind of commit his Noble, and I immediately start surrounding the Noble with these Temple Guards. And of course the Bastillodon does have respectable armor at 140, so you can kind of shrug off a lot of the Noble's non-armor piercing damage, which, as we discussed, is some sacrifice you make with the Eagle. This poor Noble's getting torn apart pretty badly. Of course, I will take some damage from bolt throwers, but it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Over here, Spirit Leech does hit my poor Croc Guard, but it doesn't really matter. Croc Guard has a lot of HP, and unlike my 2 Scar Veterans, he will never rampage. In the meantime, my Temple Guard are pushing in, or the 3 leading units, and this Noble has been kind of chased off, and I did pop a Refication Crystal cast on the Bastillodon itself, so it's able to heal itself up to a decent amount. Fortunately, my opponent keeps sniping away at me, and so what I'm trying to do now is reposition my Goon Squad into a better spot so that I can get around this Phoenix Guard and get into my opponent's backline. My opponent is now looking at a sort of dilemma. He must either defend against the Temple Guard, or he needs to defend against my Goon Squad. And so what I'm doing now is I'm committing a Temple Guard to each of these units of Phoenix Guard. I actually hadn't noticed the final unit of Phoenix Guard, and I kind of completely forgot about the fact that there's probably a unit like that somewhere around. What I do here is I do jump on this Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower, though, intent on disabling it, because I'm realizing that my poor Bastillodon over here is already under half health. It's a very slow unit. It's one of the slower monsters in the game, and it's taking a lot of massive beating. But I'm trying to keep this Temple Guard around it, because I cannot afford to lose this guy, or I definitely don't feel that I can lose him. I really need him to stick around just so that I can keep getting those heals. I'm trying to keep these Temple Guards on top of him, just that if my opponent decides to dive in, I will immediately be able to surround him and beat the snot out of him. Over here in the meantime, Croc Guard and the Scar Veteran are just kind of rampaging around the backline, doing whatever the heck they feel like. They do jump in on these Phoenix Guard. Phoenix Guard are not actually immune to fear and terror. They don't have immunity to psychology, so they are actually susceptible to that sort of stuff, though of course right now it's not so much the case. We do get a lovely surround here on the Noble, and the Noble is going to go down like an absolute 9-pin. Granted, I'm forced to cast Refication Crystal again on the Bastillodon, which is a little unfortunate. But I do keep this Noble pinned down, and this Noble is getting surrounded and absolutely slaughtered by the Temple Guards, who have a bonus against large, of course, armor piercing, and they're just very potent. Now over here you can see the Sunfang does go down and does some damage to the Temple Guards. You can see I do drop the Plaque of Dominion. Over here I'm trying to just break up these Phoenix Guard. I'm trying to isolate my opponent's troops and break them apart. You can see these Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower crews have routed off, and my opponent hasn't really noticed them. And over here the Temple Guard are just holding their own. Temple Guard have very high base morale, as we discussed before, so they'll hold out for a long amount of time, especially because my opponent has nothing to cause fear or cause terror. Of course, Phoenix Guard do cause fear. They just try to Spirit Leech my poor Bastillodon with the Refication Crystal. He does throw Tyrion in, but I've got these Temple Guards here to guard him. And now this Scar Veteran is kind of going loose and going after Tyrion, trying to shut him down. Right as his Faint Riposte wears off, and he takes a nasty hit there. Fortunately, as you can see, the Temple Guard is getting absolutely owned in close quarters against the Phoenix Guard, who is just a much better unit. Especially thanks to that martial mastery. Fortunately for my opponent, though, these Phoenix Guard over here do break. They are definitely susceptible to terror, and that's one of those things that really makes me appreciate Black Guard of Naggarond, actually. In general, I didn't believe it before, but over time, I've gotten a much bigger appreciation for Black Guard. I mean, this allows me to collapse on this unit of Phoenix Guard over here, and you can see I'm kind of pinching my opponent's troops. Unfortunately, my Bastillodon here is getting torn apart, and I did just use my Refication Crystal on these Temple Guard, just trying to keep them in the fight a little longer, even as this Lord Master of Hoth pursues me. My opponent has finally realized that these crews are just sitting around here, just trying to bring them back into the fray. And this Scar Veteran over here that was chasing Tyrion is now coming back, and I'm just simply trying to goon this Lord Master of Hoth while trying to escape with poor Bastillodon over here. I just cast Cold-Blooded on him, which is of course going to make it very susceptible to taking damage, because it nukes down its stats a whole bunch. In the meantime, over here you can see the Lord Master of Hoth is getting nuked down pretty badly. You can see I do throw in the Scar Veteran, and with the Plaque of Dominion going off, these guys, you can see that even the Phoenix Guard, which of course does not have immunity, they do have immunity to fear because they cause fear themselves, but they don't have immunity to terror, and so they will hopefully kind of rout from that. Over here though, you can see the Bastillodon is getting hit by Spirit Leech, which means that the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower crew is actually going to rout the poor Bastillodon off, which is a huge problem for me. Over in the meantime, Scar Veteran has finally dropped below that dangerous 50% threshold, and is now rampaging. Fortunately for my opponent, though, he's rampaging on top of Tyrion, who is surrounded by a very angry Croc Guard and the 2 Scar Veterans, and is getting torn apart. Meantime, my opponent has finally managed to rout off the Bastillodon, and the Bastillodon is running for dear life. My opponent does try to kind of pull his noble in here, who was beaten up and escaped with a sliver of life, but he's actually going to rout off before reaching the fight. It's one of those situations, but he's so on morale that he's just not able to stick around, and poor Tyrion does get gooned and murdered. Mounting Tyrion on a horse meant that when push came to shove, I was very easily able to assassinate him with my mob of Sarskars. Fortunately, this Sarskar over here is rampaging, and Phoenix Guard is very, very good at murdering these sort of monsters. I can't kill him quickly enough. In the meantime, though, I do actually manage to save my Bastillodon with the Refication Crystal, because I pushed Crockcar through, force path him after these Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower crewmen, and then cast Cold-Blooded on the Bastillodon, who just starts healing up, and as you can see, he's coming back up to a respectable amount. Meantime, I've just got so much healing, and it's really saving me in this situation. Over here, unfortunately, this Sarskar veteran is as good as gone, I do believe, because he simply is very low on HP. And he's rampaging, and I've got no way of breaking that rampage effect. If I cast Cold-Blooded right now, his stats are going to tank, and he's going to get annihilated. Fortunately, though, this other Sarskar veteran is still controllable and kind of doing whatever the heck he feels like. You can see I do pop Crockcar's ability there, just trying to get him into the fray, popping Swiftness of Eitzel. And you can see I'm trying to kind of isolate enemy troops. You can see these Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers here, who are kind of separated from the rest of the mob, who I'm pushing into just to try to get a little bit of assassination going. Anytime my Temple Guard is pushing in, they are definitely beaten up, but I do now have a Refication Crystal in the field, which means I'm going to be able to keep resurrecting these guys. I do still have a handful of charges on it. And at this point, my opponent's army, having taken the loss of its lord, loss of its leadership, all that sort of stuff, does decide to shatter. So, is this a functional? I actually do believe that although this is a very, in a sense, gimmicky build, and you can see the losses were pretty even on both sides, even though this is a fairly gimmicky build, I do actually believe this is a solid and workable build against High Elves, because this is about as good of a comp as the High Elves can bring. They could, of course, drop the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower entirely and bring an extra Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers entirely and bring an extra unit of, say, Lothern Sea Guard, or of course they could put their Noble, or not Lothern Sea Guard, of Phoenix Guard, or they could. There are some alternative builds, but at that point they're going to be much more susceptible to different compositions. Other than that, and so other than what I'm feeling here, so the High Elves do have to kind of consider a multitude of options, and I think this is not a bad composition. The two Sarskar veterans do give you a lot of oomph against enemy large lords. If my opponent had, for example, brought a dragon, which is really what I was kind of expecting, then these guys would have been able to surround him and beat the snot out of him. As it was against Tyrion mounted on a horse, they tore him to shreds because they have that huge bonus against large and absolutely monstrous damage output. And of course, Tyrion's armor doesn't really protect him against the massive armor-piercing damage that the three Crockcar and the two Sarskar veterans are doing. The Temple Guard, I think, are a decent anchor unit, and especially if your opponent, for example, tries to counter a goon with whatever, it would be a little strange given just how heavy this goonage is. But if your opponent did try to like push in again on you with multiple dragons or something like that, or tries to trap you with their own Phoenix Guard or something like that, you can always fall back on top of your Temple Guard and hide amongst them. And the Temple Guard are just very tanky and very sturdy, and they don't really rout. I only had one unit of Temple Guard in that game rout off, and they did come back. One of the important things to keep in mind, though, with Temple Guard is that their stats are definitely not particularly great. It's true for all Lizardmen infantry that their stats are honestly pretty terrible. Their melee attack, melee defense, all of that is not particularly impressive, and they compensate for it with sheer HP pool and generally with just the weight of their blows. But in this situation, you could obviously the Phoenix Guard just horribly outtraded my Temple Guard, and it was really actually pretty disappointing. I was actually surprised by how badly the Temple Guard performed in a straight-up fight against the Phoenix Guard. I was expecting it to be a little closer, and it really wasn't. Bastillodon was also a huge game changer, just because it kind of forced my opponent to keep trying to chase it down with the Noble, and then finally Desperation with the Lore Master of Hoeth, and even Tyrion. And because he was constantly trying to chase down the Bastillodon, I was able to kind of goon his lord and really shut him down that way. Otherwise, I do believe this is a fairly decent build, as mentioned before. It can basically counter most of anything that the elves bring. If they go for cheap wide, then Temple Guard should trade pretty well, and you can generally terror or fear out with the Sarskar veterans. If your opponent does decide to go very elite like this, then, and this is about as bad of a situation as you're going to face, then you do have the power of terror routes and just that staying power of the Temple Guards to really break them apart. So nonetheless, good game to my opponent. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about the game, anything like that, be sure to post them in the comments, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.